Hey, hello everyone. My name is Milada Valkova, or just Millie, so please call me Millie. I'm from the University of Leeds. Thank you very much for coming. Maybe squeeze a little to accommodate a few more people. And today I'll be talking about what I call EAP genre paradox. And it's very much work in progress. It's from a book I'm working on for Bloomsbury. So I welcome your suggestions afterwards of how I could improve this. I've kind of lost my train of thought already. Oh yeah, so when I submitted this, the review feedback was like, but this is not really new. It kind of isn't. So I'm not saying this is completely new, you've never heard of it. Of course, it's very difficult to do research like that. So it has been pointed out in literature, and I'll have a few quotes to show that. But I'm trying to just draw attention to a concept that I hope you will all find familiar. So what I'm trying to do is to open up a discussion to point out something that we might be aware of a little bit, but we don't talk about it enough. So if it does sound familiar, please nod. If it doesn't, it will help me if you nod anyway. Okay, so I'm calling this EAP genre paradox, so I'll be talking about genre pedagogy. And there have been several potential issues pointed out in the literature on genre pedagogy. So one is that in some genre approaches, it is believed that we can't teach students how to write genres. They have to be socialized. So we can't teach them through classroom instruction. This is, for example, in rhetorical approaches. And I don't see this as a problem, because for me, if we teach genres through classroom instruction, we are helping students to socialize into academia and into their disciplines. Another potential problem is that when we teach genres, you could argue, well, it's a bit prescriptive, or it could become prescriptive. And again, for me, this is not a problem if we are aware of this and if we remind our students that we're not giving them templates, we're giving them toolkits which they can use and choose from to create their own writing. And academic literacy's approach points out that there are multiple academic literacies and practices are often not visible. And they call on us to challenge and for students to challenge dominant practices. So what I'll be talking about is kind of similar to this in that I will talk about practices not necessarily being visible. But unlike academic literacies, I don't have a solution. So when I was submitting my proposal, there was like several options to choose from, and I chose rent. So this is not a traditional paper, it's a rent. So I'm going to talk about this as a problem, but I don't have a solution, sorry. So what do I mean by EAP genre paradox? So what I call EAP genre paradox is essentially a set of mismatches between the genres that students read and those that they produce. So for example, they read textbooks, journal articles, and then they produce essays, lab reports, dissertations. So these mismatches between these two types of genres are social and discoursal. So social mismatches, I think, are of two types. One pertains to the audience, one to the purpose, and they're closely related, of course. So expert genres are produced either for a less knowledgeable reader or for peers. So as Shaw 92 puts it, quote, textbooks inform downwards from a position of authority and articles report horizontally to peers, while writers of theses are required to display their knowledge and grasp of the subject culture to superiors. So what students do is they need to talk to a more knowledgeable and more powerful reader. And this is closely related to the purpose. So expert genres are written to inform the less knowledgeable audience or to disseminate knowledge to peers. Whereas students' genres, they might have different rhetorical purposes, but ultimately the social purpose of assessed genres is to display knowledge and to demonstrate skills. So this quote from Hyland again points out to the EAP genre paradox, as I call it. So these social mismatches then are reflected in discoursal mismatches, which are in structure and language. So when experts write, they can choose the structure, they can choose the language to match the purposes. When students write, the structure and the language can often be prescribed. When they look at writing guides, there are often simplistic rules. Many teachers believe that students must follow the rules before they can break them. And if students try to imitate the language from expert writing, it just might not be appropriate. So let me illustrate what I mean by this. So one example is we tell students to use topic sentences to improve their writing. Yeah, sounds familiar. Fair. Now, when you look at expert writing, you see this, and I'm going to give you a minute to read this quote. Yeah, ready? So when you look at this paragraph, it's a whole paragraph, sorry for the long text. It looks like, okay, the first sentence tells me about transgression of impersonality. Looks like a good topic sentence, right? But then you read the rest of the paragraph and realize it's not about transgression of impersonality. Instead, it's about authorial identity and authority. So you can think, okay, the second sentence is maybe the topic sentence. But again, when you read it closely, it's not, because it gives too much information about what has been discussed before. So this paragraph doesn't have a topic sentence as we teach it to the students. So this is the kind of writing students look at, and then we expect them to write in a different way. Would you say this is bad writing? No, it's good writing. So this shows us experts do not need topic sentences as we ask students to use them. Another example could be what the paragraph is about. The use of personal pronoun I to refer to the writer himself. And again, I think we sent it to room 101 for some of us on the first day. But again, this is something you can hear from lecturers, maybe from other teachers. Don't use I. And then students look at expert writing and they see it. So they're like, so if he can use it, why can't I use it? So it's kind of games going on. We tell students one thing, we do another. So I've got 3 anecdotes from practice to illustrate this. So the first one is from a former student of mine who was told by another teacher, not at our university, like, who are you to write like that? So that writing is okay for expert writers, but who are you? So why is there this power distance? And this was a PhD student, so when do you become entitled to write like that? Another anecdote comes from a colleague of mine, with her kind permission for me to use this. So my colleague was working with a subject tutor, and the subject tutor told my colleague it would be nice if the students said what their purpose of writing is in the text. So my colleague talked to the students about it, and the student said, but she knows what the purpose is. She decided because she gave us this assignment. So why are we pretending? I will tell you what to do, and then you told me you chose to do this. And this is similar to the last anecdote. So this is from my course when my PhD students are writing a research report. And during the course, we look at a sample research report, which is published as a journal article. and it's very brief. And the author explains this paper is purposely brief in order to da-da-da. And 2 out of 7 students decided to use the same phrase, and they said this paper is purposely brief. And it doesn't work. It's not purposely brief because they decided to make the paper brief, because I gave them the word count. So again, there's this power that is not reflected in the purpose and not reflected in the language. So these are the examples of what I mean by the concept of EAP genre paradox. Now, is it a problem? Yes, it is. So going beyond those anecdotes, let me show you something from the literature, why it is a problem. So research has shown that when student writers write for the teacher, because that's the person who will be reading and assessing the writing, and they know they share knowledge with that reader, they do not develop content in depth. Why should we tell her? She knows. And sometimes they do not even cite sources. It's core reading of the course. The teacher knows, we don't need to cite it. So of course that's problematic for the quality of writing and has impact on academic integrity as well. Novice student writers even tend to use spoken register. They're writing for Millie, they know me, right? So why should we, if we're speaking informally in class, if they're writing for me, why should they use formal language? Also, if students know their purpose is to display knowledge, they take fewer risks in their writing. So they do not experiment, they do not try to develop, they want to play it safe because they're writing for assessment. And also students can be uncomfortable assuming authority, so that goes back to who are you? I'm not them, can't write like them, it's for them. And also expressing criticality. So this is from Jomaa and Bidin's paper, who talked to PhD students who found it difficult to critique literature, and they said, well, I can't critique literature because what if the author of that will be my examiner in Viva? So you can see EAP genre paradox is a problem because it impacts on the quality of student writing in different ways. So what can we do about it? What implications does it have? So for research and scholarship, I would suggest we should not compare student and expert genres without considering these discoursal differences. So to give you an example, Chen's study looks at frequency of linking words, or transition markers if you wish, in student writing in MA dissertations and compares it to journal articles. And then says student writers overuse or underuse transition markers. But is that a fair comparison if we're looking at completely different genres which have different lengths and different information density? So we should find ways of talking about and researching student issues in different ways than comparing different genres in student writing and expert writing. What are the implications for teaching? So first of all, acknowledge the paradox. So as Coe puts it, we need to talk about purposes, audiences. And this is something I talk to my students like, yes, if you were writing not for assessment, but because you're also writing for assessment, you need to consider this. So we're kind of making it more explicit to them that they need to write in accordance with their purpose and with their audience. Clarify the intended audience. So again, if they think they're writing for Millie, I need to tell them, write for an audience that knows this much. You're not really writing for me, so you're writing for an imagined audience. And I get this from my PhD students very often, like, am I writing for a discipline specialist or someone who is not a specialist, because I'm not a specialist in their discipline? And finally, empower students to follow or flout conventions to achieve their purpose. And this is in line with critical pragmatic EAP. So when I talk to students, I tell them, you can do this, and then we talk about the implications that their choices in their text may or may not have on their social context, for example. So I've talked you through what I call EAP genre paradox. I've explained why I think it's a problem. This is kind of a little bit of a patch on the problem, but doesn't remove the problem. And possibly some of you are thinking, well, there's an obvious solution. Why don't we provide students with student exemplars? But I think this merely accentuates the problem. So let me explain why. So if you're teaching genres, you're using a genre approach, and whether you're using the Swalesian or SFL, unless you think classroom instruction is not the way, you require access to exemplars for analysis. Yeah, so you want to teach a genre, you need to show it to students. So that assumes that students have access to the genres, but do students have access to student genres? Not really. So if it's a doctoral dissertation, yes, they can access it. If it's a student essay, they are not able to access it. So the one who's providing that access is you as EAP practitioner. So there's already some power there, and you're the one who chooses, or your subject lecturer chooses it for you, what the students can access in the first place and how much. But that's not all. For me as a language teacher, the main problem is that students don't read student genres for content. And this principle of reading a text for content before analyzing it is one of the basic principles of language teaching. So if you look at a published ELT textbook, it's always text, read for content, gist, details, then language analysis. So if you bring student exemplars to class and you give them to students, okay, let's analyze this. They haven't processed the content yet. So you might think, oh, this rule is for ELT, we're EAP, we're different, we're fine. But I think if you just give students and let's analyze, they haven't processed the content, and their minds will be busy with trying to understand what the student work says rather than being ready to analyze its language and structure. And this is related to the schema theory, which basically says that if students are frequently exposed to a genre, they will develop formal schemata. So they will kind of know, they will be familiar with it, they will have developed perhaps tacit knowledge, not necessarily explicit, of what a particular genre looks like in terms of content, structure, and language. And you could say, well, bringing student exemplars helps to develop those formal schemata, but I would question, if you bring 3 exemplars, spend 2 hours on that, does it really develop schemata? So you need much more exposure, because it's about frequent exposure, and much more processing of that for students to develop these schemata. So essentially, when I talk about EAP genre paradox, I'm talking about mismatches in purposes for reading and knowledge between expert genres and student genres. The expert genres, students read frequently, they read them for content, and they probably have formal schemata. So my PhD students, if I ask them what's in the abstract, they know because they've read many abstracts. But for student genres, they have limited access. They do not read them for content, even if we enable access to them. And formal schemata need to be developed, but that can only be done through frequent exposure. And I don't have a solution to that, like I said, so apologies. Do I still have time? So to sum up, student and expert genres differ in multiple ways in terms of purpose, audience, structure, language, and we know that, that's fine. But I want to highlight that this has implications for the acquisition of academic writing in terms of content, criticality, academic integrity, and appropriate use of language. And it can be detrimental to students' acquisition of academic writing. And like I said, I can't see a solution. I don't think we can avoid the problem. If you have a solution, please tell me. So all I think we can do is to raise awareness of students and of teachers. So let's stop playing those games and pretending, and let's acknowledge it. Let's talk to students about it. Let's acknowledge it's a problem. Thank you very much.